Hello, my name's David Jones. I'm one of the founding directors of Sirius. We're concert producers and festival organisers, and we work mostly with international artists in what I would call the tip of the iceberg, the big concerts that we put on in London. But then underneath that is all the work that we do, creating big festivals, creating special events, and that's where we really work with young artists who also feed in through our learning work that we create, our work with families, and the big talent development programs like Take 5, the jazz artist development program that we do. And these are all really geared to working with musicians as creators, musicians who have ideas and want to develop them, and that's where we try and work with them.
Hi everyone, I'm Becky Farrell. I'm currently General Manager of IMG Artists UK and work global marketing for the company as well. My background is record labels, so marketing and product development at Sony Classical and EMI Classics in New York and here. And primarily what I do now is more work with our musicians to help them develop their plans, who they are, their branding, and making sure that their public-facing career is authentic to who they are as people and what they want to be as artists.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Victoria Barrett from VLT Legal Services. I offer legal advice in relation to music copyright, all types of music contracts and digital rights, and also more generalized sort of business intellectual property advice relating to software licensing, software rights, trademark registration, branding, that sort of thing. And I also provide a sort of legal advice and contract checking service through the ISM as, you know, part of the legal advice that they give.
Hiya, I'm Andy Corrigan. I run a company called Viva Visa, and we organise visas and immigration things generally, mostly for the people in the music industry, but also for the film and theatre industries. And we look after everything from individual artists just starting out, doing their very first foray out of the UK, or going from another country to another country, right up to quite big international touring parties with, you know, more than 100 people on their team. My background is many years of tour management and tour production, so I kind of hopefully understand how things operate on tour. And before that, and subsequently, was a musician in a not very good punk band. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we get going with some questions, we'd like to know a bit about you, simply by, if I may ask you to raise your hand if you are in any of the following categories, just for interest. How many students have we got here? Full-time students at the moment. You're very welcome at the beginning of your careers. That's great. How many of you are based in London or near to London, within 20 miles of London? Okay. Thank you. How many of you are from further away from London? Excellent. I like the regions to be represented, coming from the West Midlands myself. It's always a pleasure to hear that we have people who are not necessarily based in London. What sort of music do you play? Anybody strictly classical? Anybody doing classical other stuff as well? Who teaches? Who is an event promoter, manager, producer? Whether it's one concert you put on or a festivals or whatever, however modest, it's what experience you've got. Anybody do anything else that I haven't mentioned? Oh, excellent. This is what I want. Have we got mics in the room? One there. Can we have a gentleman on the second row here? Yep, hand up. Please tell us what you do with the mic. Give us your name, please.
Right, my name is Robert. I come from Portsmouth and I'm a sound engineer.
Thank you. And another hand? One over there? Was there another hand up over there of someone who does something that's... Yes, there you are. That's the row. Thank you. Your name, please.
My name is David. and I represent an organisation called Tatua, which is based in Goa, India, and we have a therapeutic retreat and residences for all artists.
Goodness me, that sounds fantastic. And was there one more? One more here, I've heard.
Hi, my name is Belle, and I work as a songwriter, so working in the world of publishing, and I'm also an artist, predominantly in the dance music world.
Fantastic. And I have one more question for you. I mean, what a great diversity we've got in just those 3 contributions. Anybody not based in the UK? Fantastic. Do tell me you've come here specially for this ISM event. Yeah, that's what we want to hear. Now, before we go any more deeply, I've got lots of questions, but we're much more interested in your questions. Has anyone got a broad question, a detailed question for any of our panel members? Thank you. One at the front, please. Could you give us your name and maybe a bit about what you do in one sentence?
Hi, hello, my name's Robin. You could say I was a promoter, I'm a musician, I'm a workshop leader, and I guess you could say that I'm an experimental jazz trumpet player. I hope that's a sentence. So my question is that I work with lots of people with learning disabilities and autism, and they're my peers because I have autism. And I feel like quite often that we don't get to play gigs to the rest of the world, that we're very kind of like, we've got our own networks. And there's been some work by organisations like Constant Flux and the Stay Up Late campaign to create more integrated gigs. But because there's so many things happening, I think that we often kind of get lost. And I think also that mainstream promoters worry about putting on acts with members of the disability community because they are concerned about, what their needs might be. So does the panel have any thoughts about perhaps providing some gateways or pathways or, opening doors for artists with disabilities, particularly learning disability and autism?
Thank you for the question. Can I start with you, David?
Yeah, I mean, speaking personally, I find there must be a barrier within me because I'm always worried about using the wrong language, describing things wrongly, sort of unwittingly offending people. But I also know that a lot of the artists, a lot of the bands that we work with have people within them who would define themselves as being on an autistic spectrum, and I think that's something that lies within a lot of music making. And sometimes those are things that you find out over a period, and sometimes they're things, as you're doing, Robin, you're saying this is part of who you are and this is how you work. I mean, within what we do, and I think within what a lot of organisations do, it would be possible to work with you and to create something that where we were talking and we were creating some sort of setting for it. I mean, one of the things that Sirius produces is the EFG London Jazz Festival, and there are about 300 events within it, and we could create something with you in an appropriate space and do that for next year. And I'd really like to talk about that, if we can sort of meet up maybe in the coffee break and just have a chat and sort of talk about where we could go. But in a broader sense, how do you work? I do sense that a door's swinging open. I think a lot of people, I think festivals are always really important. Festivals are the opportunity to change things and look at things anew and what happens in a venue and what happens in a city. And I think a lot of festivals at the moment would be very interested in doing that. And again, I can help make some introductions. I'm sure other people on the panel can. And I would say that's probably a better place to go than maybe a mainstream promoter who's trying to do loads and loads of work and would be interested, would be sympathetic, but probably needs a proposition that's fairly explained. And again, we could help you create that.
Well, that's a really constructive and promising response. Thank you very much for the question, but also for your answer. It's also a great advert for the coffee break and the lunch break and the tea break, because part of why you're here is to collar these people. And they won't all promise you a gig, but they will promise you a conversation, and that's what matters, because musicians have to work together. It's not a solitary business. If it is, you're very, I was going to say lucky, but I mean actually very unlucky. It's about collaboration. Any more questions immediately for the panel? We have one at the back, I think.
Hello.
Name, please.
Hi, my name's Kit Rice, and I'm a recording artist from South East London, composer, musician. As somebody who's just starting out and has been gigging in the UK, what would be the best way to start branching out to European countries and to other countries gigging, and touring in other countries?
Who wants to go at that? Andy? David?
Probably the best place.
Yeah, I mean, I think people in the rest of the world are utterly bemused by what Britain is doing right at the moment, politically, and they're trying to understand. But your predecessors have actually made links into Europe. I think the best way to think about working in Europe is to talk to the people who you are closest to, the people who inspired you, the people who have already done it. In my experience, very few musicians sit there jealously guarding their contacts and not sharing them with anybody. Again, festivals tend to be a place where people will come from abroad. Depends. Can you tell me, Kit, what kind of music you play?
Sorry, I lost the microphone. I'm an R&B pop singer, but I also do top lines for drum and bass. And I've been on Radio 1 and KISS a couple times.
Great. So, I mean, thinking about one of the kind of big events like Sound City that tend to sort of cluster in May, and thinking of getting yourself down there and being able to meet people is a good idea. There are things like the International Festival in Groningen, where it's Eurosonic, which happens in January, which is a good one to go to. Funnily enough, the French Music Bureau might be good people to talk to, because they actually, probably more than anybody else I can think of, have developed a very practical presence on the ground. British Undergrounds are important as well, and they're very open to helping people. They tend to publish a lot of material because they don't so much support individual artists, they're more sort of advocates for a scene. But I think at the moment there's a lot of ways that things can help. But to me, it always starts with the people you know, rather than trying to reach out to people that you don't know.
Thank you.
Can I ask whether anyone's had any recent experience or is expecting to have any experience of contractual difficulties around employment or self-employment or unpaid fees or anything connected with being a musician? Has anybody got an issue that they could bring to us? There's a person in the middle, please. Oh, they're fighting over which microphone to give you. And we have a second question there, so could you get the mic to that gentleman to be number 2? Your question first.
Hi, I'm Anna Appleby. I'm a Manchester-based composer and teacher. Part of being a composer is constantly negotiating new, often very informal contracts and agreements with other musicians and artists, dancers, producers, all sorts of people. And I think I've been self-employed for 2 and a bit years now, and I'm getting better at negotiating contracts and that sort of thing. But I think something that many of my peers struggle with as well is that you can be offered a gig as a composer, and the actual act of getting a contract is really difficult, because most composers don't have agents, and everything's done quite informally. So it's often, oh, I'd love you to do this, let's chat about it, let's get a drink, And if you say, I'd love to know what the fee's going to be, I'd love to know what the contract is, it's often made into kind of a secondary issue and kind of pushed to the side, because people just want to focus on the creative stuff, which is great. But I was just wondering if any of you have any advice for all of the freelance composers out there like me who often struggle to really assert the need for an agreement or a contract, something set in stone which actually frees both parties without seeming like someone who's really difficult to work with. That's my kind of question.
Well, I suppose I can answer that one. I completely agree with you that that's the point of it, is to free both parties, but a lot of people take the opposite view and feel a bit frightened, and certainly I know sometimes if you produce an agreement, the whole thing just vaporizes, doesn't it? So that's very difficult, because what I was going to suggest was it would be worth you investing time and perhaps a little money into getting a sort of suite of your own contracts set up, so that you can just put them in front of commissioners. Presumably, you said you often have to contract with the musician, so you expected you have to record. Sometimes you have to record the commission as well and present it as a digital file or something, do you?
Yeah, quite often if I'm working with dancers particularly.
Right. So you're already doing this, so you presumably have a whole set of sort of release forms yourself that you've...
Not exactly. I've generally worked with a lot of different companies who have their own contracts they send out.
Yes.
And sometimes I look at those and think, okay, what can I use from that when I'm doing something on a kind of one-to-one basis.
Yes.
But it's something I'm still navigating, and I think a lot of my peers are navigating it, and sometimes we get exploited because of it.
Well, I would say, regard yourself as a business unit, because you're already acting potentially as a sort of record label and publisher in a sense. So get yourself set up with all the standard contracts you need, so that if one isn't forthcoming, you can present it to them. Keep them as simple as possible. And the other thing is that, as I said, the ISM can probably help you with that anyway, so I should get in touch. Well, I'll be around all day anyway, so...
That's great, thanks. Just on the end of that as well, what does the panel think we can do, and you particularly, to encourage a culture in the music industry where composers, especially young composers, are treated as the same as performing musicians are? Because I've had a lot of gigs recently where I know that the performing musicians are given a contract and a fee and all of that kind of stuff up front, but the composers are sort of, it's seen as a favour that they're doing me, that they're going to do my music. So I have to say, I'm really grateful that you're doing my music, but I need to eat and I need to pay my bills. So, so what do you think we can do to set up a culture in the music industry and the arts where really composers are valued equally to performers in that way?
I think that it's really important for any artist, any creator, to understand and hold their intellectual property. It is part of your job. It's the training in the music or whatever it is that you're creating is of course your focus, but the other elements that it is a business. And I also think that when you understand what is yours and what the rules are and what the guidelines and the protections that are out there, then you won't feel bad about, oh, but I want to work with these people, and so it's the opportunity. No, it's their opportunity to work with you and to collaborate with you. And the only way that you can have that freedom, that artistic freedom to express yourself, is to know that everyone is being respected and taken care of. And that means that you know what your rights are afterwards. You know what your financial contribution will be. And if you've made a choice that these are people that I really want to work with, maybe it'll evolve into something later, and you make a choice to say, okay, I'm giving up this to have that, that's fine if it's your choice. But it's really worth, and I don't know if the ISM has intellectual property resources. I'm assuming that they do, and kind of a help desk. But it's something that's so important, and it comes down to even a photo that is on Google. That's in copyright until 90 years after the photographer has died. So any photo you see is pretty much under copyright. You can't just use it in the same way that you want to be compensated. You have to realize all of the different creators that are sole proprietors, and we need to work together. And so one of the things I think that everybody needs to do on our side, we're on a management side, we are fiercely protective of not just our artists' rights, but also of the people that they work with, because that mutual respect is core. But the more that we start realizing that art isn't just this thing that we give, but it is something that we give, but we need to get something in return, and that the more we treat each other with that level of respect by understanding contracts and not thinking that you don't have the right to ask for these things, feel empowered to know your rights and to assert them. In a polite way, but still assert those rights, because you deserve that, and it's the only way it'll work, having that knowledge. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I feel very strongly is that musicians as things have changed so much in the last 20 years in terms of what's expected of musicians, and often you feel that musicians are being asked to do almost everything, you know, whereas in the past, you know, a musician's job was to play and perhaps be a creative force behind the music they were playing. There's now so many expectations that you will do things, and often do things for nothing. And I think it's very important that people do stand together and do articulate, not that they want huge fees, because that just means you won't be able to work, or you won't be able to work in the places you might want to work, but that what your expectations are, and if you do that, you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting other people. And I think one of the simplest things you can do is just write down what's been discussed. Just send people an email, because that very often just is the evidence that something was agreed and something was talked about. And if someone then won't engage with it, won't even reply to it, then you know that's probably not something that you as a composer should perhaps be asking other people, musicians, other kinds of creators, to work on. You know, you can manage where you put your efforts and your resources.
Thank you. Before we come to our next question, has Andy have you got anything to contribute extra to what's been said about this musicians having to do everything for themselves now?
I think speaking as someone who was a musician, you know, well, sort of back in a long time ago, when the expectation you didn't go and play a gig and then sell T-shirts afterwards and do all your own PR and everything. You kind of expected someone else to do it. And now, and doing a few gigs again recently, and going back into the world where you do have to do it. It is a bit of an eye-opener, but it's kind of quite good, and it means that you can, as a musician, you can be in control. We used to talk a lot about having control over our output, and it was a kind of, and record companies would pay lip service to it, say yes, you can have creative control, and they didn't mean that at all. They meant that you could have creative control if it sold a lot of records, because they didn't care. But now I think that musicians can have control of their entire career and output, and it's kind of just a different way of thinking. I think we have to think of ourselves as being the all-round entrepreneurs, really. I mean, I think the problem with that, though, is it can mean that the music gets sidelined, and somehow you can kind of forget that, you're not there to sell T-shirts, and what you're there to do is play and sell music, and that's your unique thing. But I think in terms of what you're talking about not getting compensated for particular, I don't know very much about the world of classical music and how normally composers are paid for when their music's performed. But however, what I do is if I'm looking at a deal, an offer for a show or something, I will look at the gross. I'll look at what's the capacity of the place, how much are they selling tickets for, and then look at what we're being offered and say, well, hang on, this and if it's a very small amount of money, then I'm probably not in a position to negotiate a large fee. But if it's a larger amount of money, then you can have an idea. There is some money in the deal for me. And also, as was pointed out, the idea of having your own contracts, your own paperwork, I think you could probably get someone to advise you and go through them for probably, speaking out, so it wouldn't be that, it would be not that expensive, and it would probably be a good investment, because people are very poor at sending out contracts. And if you send out yours, and it can be a real simple agreement, can't it? It doesn't have to be pages and pages. Then you're in the driving seat then, and and the chances are that you can sort of define the terms. So I think you have to be just be proactive, and it's kind of it's a drag, but I think once you start doing that and you get into the way of doing it, it's okay, and it is empowering, of course.
Yes, thanks. I think Victoria's got something to add.
I just want to add one small thing. You asked about that sort of, why do the performers get paid, and there's a blind spot about paying the composer. I think it may well be a failure to understand what you do, because they don't see what you do. I think it's that, isn't it? And actually, when I started doing legal work, because I work on my own, I had slightly the same issue. I didn't quite know what to charge people, because I felt that they would think, well, that's a lot of money to charge for 3 sides of A4. But of course, basically, bringing it down to business talk, you're providing a service. So it's a composer's commission agreement is a type of service contract, and that's what they have to understand. It's the hours of time behind the scenes. And maybe they think that, you know, it just comes to you through the ethers and it happens when you're sleeping or something. I think it is a conceptual problem as well. So again, you just being very straightforward and making them understand that this is a service you're providing, I think, you know, will help to start to change attitudes.
Thank you very much. Deborah would like to...
I just wanted to say that on the ISM website, there are stacks of standard contracts. So if you're an ISM member, you have access to all those standard contracts, whether you're a composer, performer or teacher. Because most of the 1,600 legal cases a year we get actually are about contracts and musicians not getting the paper in place before they go off and compose or perform or whatever. So I know it's boring, but it's essential. So use the ISM website, get your contract, get tooled up.
Good advice. Another question here, I think, or do we have one over there? One hand up here.
Thank you. My name is Antonio Sadantas, and I'm a composer, conductor, and performer. And my question regards comments that were made before about creativity and the different works that we have to do. As doing these 3 things, I've been told multiple times along the past years that I should focus only on one thing, but I always ask myself if that's not, in a way, also kind of pigeonholing my output that I see as one creative output in these different phases, wearing these different faces. And at the same time, coming from Portugal, having studied in Austria, and now here, I have worked in these different places, however, not enough so that it gains track. I gain stability in each one of these countries, and being spread out geographically, people that are here cannot attend concerts in Portugal. So, and I do work with situations where people should be there and experience the music. So I'd like to hear your opinions on spreading out creatively, sorry, I can't seem to find the word, but I guess you understand, and spreading out geographically as well. What you think about that?
I think this is something we work with a lot, especially with some of our younger artists who are a classical pianist, but also learning conducting and has a jazz influence thing, or working with different kinds of music. And and in the same way when I was on the record label side, I think that it's, different people do different things, and I think that that's okay. You just need to know, and it answers this, it's the same thing with that explains the region thing. Marketing is essentially knowing what your story is and knowing who you're telling it to and how those people want to hear the story. So if you think of it that way, and I think one of the things that all artists or creatives should do, but maybe don't as much as you might think, is actually look at who you are and be able to explain to someone what it is that you do. It's not just, you have 3 violinists with similar training. None of them will have the same strengths or weaknesses or interpretation. And I don't always think that people take the time to verbalize that, because it can be hard to think, to figure it out. But if this is who you are as an artist, that's great. Now it might be in Austria, the focus is on your conducting, and that's how you want them to know who you are, but not exclusively. It's understanding your home market and your main market, because the best way, this kind of goes back to also the earlier question about how to be heard in different places. Don't think the whole world. Find the territory or the area that is most natural to you. It's either where you studied, where you're from, where you're living now, and really build your supporters there so you have people who are speaking about you and that you can go to for help. And then figure out where's that next place that you go. That's on a region side, but it's very similar with how to do a multifaceted career without it seeming, oh, I don't know who to call them. Do they do this? Do they do that? Are they focused on everything? You can be, just find out who wants to hear which aspect of you. I hope that was, it's in my head, I'm not sure it was that clear, but make sure really focus on knowing what you're trying to say and who you're saying it to, and then it's okay, because actually that's what's so exciting. People who want to collaborate have different things to add to the conversation. It shouldn't be limiting, and no one should say, pretty much every conductor is also a musician, a performing musician. They're all musicians, of course. Just putting that out there. But you shouldn't feel, and if anybody is saying to you, oh, I don't really get you, then maybe they're not your correct future partner. Maybe they're not the person who understands you, who is representing you or working with you. You'll find someone else who's like, oh, I totally get it, and that's really cool, and I'm invigorated and excited by what you're doing. Let me help you with that. So really know what you're saying, and then it won't be as difficult as you think. Hope that was...
Do you have anything to add to that, David?
I think when people ask you that narrow question about, you're a composer, you're a conductor, and you've got to specialise, you just say Benjamin Britten and Pierre Boulez, and the subject should go away. I mean, it's like, that in that world, you can think of plenty of examples of people where that's a very strong creative force. I think in a wider sense, the world is, I think, interested in music, and interested in that sense of music that's being made new. I sort of steer away from the phrase new music, because that's got a very specific theme, but that sense of creativity is very, very attractive. It's what's revitalised the visual arts in Britain over the last 30 years. It's why people go to the theatre. It's to see things that are new and special, and with the combination of talents that you've got, you can do those things, and that seems to me one of the things that's probably fundamental for most of the people in the room. As you're going to go forward, it's those things being understood.
Thank you. This takes us neatly into the international side of things. There's a question there which we'll come back to, but I'd like to ask Andy and Victoria about the implications, the difficulties, the hurdles of working internationally, travel, legal, all that. So Andy, perhaps first.
Okay. I think it's always been the aspiration, or it's kind of always been something that musicians have wanted to do, is to tour internationally. And the guy that asked the question earlier about taking his music out into Europe and reaching out over there, I think on many levels it's become easier to do it these days. I should have maybe added that point to that question, that a lot of music is disseminated through social media groups, and gigs are got and booked through that. I mean, most countries in the world and big cities will have a promoters group of amateur promoters that put on, particularly you talked about drum and bass music, particularly in the dance music world, and there's a lot of exchange of performers and DJs and promoters through that, and a kind of an underground sort of network, and so there's a lot of communication. So communication is a lot easier than it used to be. In the old days, it was obviously hard to arrange shows around the world and to arrange travel because of the obvious lack of the difficulties of communication. At the same time, we've had there are barriers being put up towards international travel for musicians, and particularly going to the US. Has been something that's always been difficult for musicians and for anyone working there, and it seems to have got worse in the last couple of years with the current American government. So that is a huge barrier. What can I say? There are companies that will work to try and help you to do it. But it is difficult, and it's financial. The barriers are financial and bureaucratic. I suppose the other question that's coming in, obviously people are touring to other destinations internationally. There's a question over there, a person from Goa. Quite a lot of artists are performing in India, which possibly they wouldn't have done in the past. It would be only the really major ones that would, so a few years ago. Now smaller people are going over to that country, and also the other territories like China is hugely emerging and growing market. The difficulties of performing there are ones created by the general Chinese bureaucracy and governmental systems, but they are gradually being overcome, and more people are going and performing in China, and many of the Western companies have set up offices there to facilitate that. And I guess the other question that will be on people's minds is what's going to happen with Europe and the restrictions on travelling to Europe as a performing musician. Up till now, of course, has been, if you're from the UK or from the EU, there's been complete freedom of movement to go to perform wherever you wish. Theresa May announced at the Tory conference this week her sort of plans, because we get asked a lot about what's going to happen after Brexit, and we kind of say, well, we're not sure because nothing's, we don't know yet, but please be assured that whatever it does, we'll try and be on top of it and help in as much as we can. It now seems that she said that there's going to be an end to free movement of people around the EU and to and from the UK. And on top of that, I think in the small print there was the question that they're going to bring in an ESTA type thing. Everyone knows what they are, which is an electronic sort of visa like you need to go to the US or to go to Canada. And there's talk of this being brought in for people coming into the UK, and the same thing, the EU is likely to bring one in going into the EU from outside. However, I don't think that there's going to be a situation where people from the UK are going to be required to have actual visas to go into Europe, because in the same way that people from the US going to Europe aren't required to have a visa for certainly for short trips, and in terms of certainly for performing musicians, although there's slightly grey areas, it's only France that requires you to have a work permit if you're from outside of the EU. So I think that the situation will get more difficult, but not insurmountably so. And I think it will take a while to settle down. The other question, I don't know how it impacts on most of the people here, is the question of not just the movement of people, it's the movement of equipment and the instruments, how they go in and out of go from country to country. Do everyone know what carnets are? No, blank. Yes, you do. Yes. Yeah. What a carnet is a document. It's a passport for goods. So what it means is if you're taking your equipment or instruments from one country to another, you have a set of paperwork that is stamped when you enter the country and when you leave it, that says it's an insurance that says you're not going to leave it there and sell your priceless violin in another country and take the money. You're going to bring it back to where it came from. And these are required for most countries in the world, but not for Europe apart from Switzerland and Norway. But it's likely that when we leave the EU that these will be required to go into Europe, and that will put a financial, bureaucratic and time burden, particularly time. This applies to, obviously more so to major tours which have a lot of equipment and transportation, and they're fairly straightforward to do, but it's another thing that's going to be put in our way. So, sorry, I've rambled on a bit there.
Thank you very much. Anything legal we should be aware of, Victoria?
Well, obviously, as far as international contracts are concerned, it is often quite a problem actually getting a contract. I believe particularly with gigs in China, they often appear, very close to the date of performance. And often another issue is is the contract going to appear in English or a language that you don't understand? I mean, contracting internationally can be difficult, but once those problems are overcome, the issues you would be looking for would be the same as in a contract in your home country as well, on the whole, except obviously issues to look at particularly would be everything around the force majeure cancellation type clauses, because that's an important part of the contract. If things go wrong and you need to travel back quickly, or you have to stay in the country for longer than you're expecting, those sort of costs you would want to be sure were covered. Governing law as well, very often that very last little sentence of the contract, you would ideally you would always want it to say that the governing law and jurisdiction are England. If it says that it's the law of Goa or something, that would mean that you wouldn't necessarily understand what your rights were, so things like that to look for. how much you can influence them, I don't know. As far as Brexit is concerned, that does raise certain questions with contracts. I mean, a handful of things to look for in particular would be the possibility that after Brexit, your fee might be worth a different amount to what you thought it was going to be. So bear things like that in mind. I mean, ideally, if you could agree a sterling fee, that would be wonderful, or some sort of fee adjustment mechanism in the case of Brexit affecting exchange rates, things like that. But actually, I think the ISM is going to publish an article next month about what to look for in your contracts in the event of Brexit, so look out for that.
We have, thank you very much. We have a microphone somewhere for somebody. I thought somebody had a microphone. Somebody here.
I have it, the microphone. I'm a composer, a pianist, a teacher, and I've been an arts festival, multi-arts festival director. I'm interested in particular in using the heritage, our classical heritage, in conjunction with contemporary forms to look at new ways of composing. I'm particularly interested in multimedia digital arts, such as VR and apps and so on, both for education and entertainment. And I'm also quite interested in developing a new kind of workspace. I hope that Darren Henley is going to give me some money, which I'll know about shortly. I think he's gone now, has he? I can't ask him now. And what I'm hoping is that within about a year or so, I would be able to begin a new startup to start putting all of these things together. One of the things I'm finding particularly difficult is that there's a lot of interdisciplinary stuff going on, and how to collect all of these things together. So perhaps our panelists could pretend that they're in my place and tell me what they would do.
Who'd like to start on that?
Well, it's something that we're having a lot of conversations about VR and different things, the rights issues, and also how to do it. And it's so new that it's kind of, if the best idea will win, or probably right after that. I don't have a good answer on it because it is something that we're all trying to figure out how that space is going to work. One of the things I think is great is in the last, say, 18 months, the technology has caught up where there are these tiny little grapefruit-sized cameras that can be really unobstructive, and it also means that no matter what level of performance, cost, size, whatever, VR is going to be really open to lots of people. How that would work as, I don't know if that's what you meant, on a collaborative space that two people in different areas would be sharing a virtual performance space, I'm not sure. But what I do know is that it's changing so fast, but I've been amazed at how the costs have dropped, and how it's something that I could do in my office, which is not something I ever would have thought I would have heard a year ago. So don't really know, except I would say just read everything you see, you can, and meet with everybody who contacts you about this, because it's changing so fast, and it's very exciting. Your project sounds very exciting.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Any other panel members want to comment? Victoria.
I would just say, very boring but necessary, just at some point sit down and make sure that you've absolutely got a clear idea of all the rights you're going to have to clear. And also, possibly with VR, there might be some privacy and data protection issues.
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, draw up a big chart or something. so just so you can, in every situation, you just have a little mental checklist of, what things do I need to clear? What might the cost implications be? Hopefully, the various blanket licenses would cover all of that. But
thank you very much. Thank you for that interesting question. One in the middle here, please.
Okay. My name is Alea. I moved here about 1 year ago, and from the United States. and I've been lucky to be freelance full-time violin for the past 6 months. But I'm in this odd position where, because I'm freelance and I don't have one person giving me all my jobs, that there's a lot of extra help that I'm in that in-between phase of I don't have money for management, but I need the help, but I can't just have people who are going to get distracted by other opportunities later. What's your advice for that in-between position?
Well, if you're a classical artist, I can't speak to pop with the same level.
It's everything. I do classical, I do, cabaret clubs, all sorts of things.
You should not be paying for management. So there are other things that are an investment, like publicity or someone building your website or things like that. But management should be commission. And I do know that there are some places that say if you haven't reached this threshold, there might be a service fee, but if you're thinking about management, I think it's, and it is so important, especially in classical, finding out that right person. It's because there are so many different options now. I work for a big global company, but your manager is still going to be one or two managers and one or two associates. It's even if it's big and you have we have a great network and things like that, it's still that that close connection. So on that side, whether it's a boutique or whatever, but you shouldn't have anybody who's trying to charge you so that they represent you. That's just not how it works.
Is the best route then just to find somebody with the interest and do the commission? Is it just a matter of just finding somebody who works, or is there a resource to look for? Just where's that starting step for the in-between phase?
I think IAMA is a really good resource, which is the ISM for artist management. And so they have, YCAT is really good. There are a lot of young musicians groups that have networking events, and I know we always send a couple of people to go so that people can talk to us and ask questions. I think ask around to find out who you would have the best fit with, and just meet people. Invite managers to a showcase or a concert, and pretty much every manager I know they might not have time to get back to you that day, but we want to help. We have a lot of knowledge and we have a lot of insight and things like that, and even if we can't commit to representing you, it might not be the right fit, and that's not about you. So it's such a close relationship that you either know or you don't know who your right manager is. But I mean, I'm happy to chat with you after as well. But people want to help. People want to help, but no one should be charging you for management. It comes from commission.
Thank you.
I have a question on paper here that I think follows on really well from this question, and that is, how do you know who to trust? Any views on that? Start with David.
I would say you trust the people that you know. Word of mouth, artists, musicians, grapevine. That's how you're actually going to find stuff out.
Yeah.
And if people are saying, I got ripped off by that person, or it didn't work out, or I was held for 3 months and nothing happened, don't work with them. Or find out what went wrong. Maybe the problem was with maybe the musician has a part to play in that as well. But find stuff out, work with the people that you trust, and you probably won't go wrong. But don't have a skeptical frame of mind. I'd say, not cynical, but just stand there and think, is this really going to work this way? And if only 10% of what this person's suggesting can actually be made to happen in the next 6 months, is that worth me working with them? Your time is precious, but half an hour spent chatting to someone isn't going to hurt you, and you're going to find things out, and you're going to find different connections. The other thing I would say, which I think sort of relates actually to the last question a bit, is in jazz, which is an area I know pretty well, there's a lot of people who individually are making a freelance living, but they want to create things that need a structure around them. They want to do things that need a bigger picture. And there's been quite a lot of collectives that have sprung up, and maybe they only last 18 months or 2 years. They tend not to have longevity any more than any one given band stays together forever and ever. But it's a way of being able to pool ideas, think, learn from the people who find a breakthrough, and see if you can, create a scene. That's almost part of what you're trying to do. Especially for people, younger people here. People don't know who you are. I remember spending until I was 25 feeling that I was invisible and that nobody cared about what I thought and nobody was interested, and I was just banging my head against a sort of glass wall, and then suddenly you've gone through the wall and people do want to pay attention, and then it gets scary because you think you're omnipotent, but work together with people and you'll go much further.
Thank you for that very sensible answer. Question right here at the front, please. Oh, sorry, you were first. So number 1 and number 2. Number 1, please. Hello.
Hi, so firstly, I have to say, David, thank you so much for Sirius. I'm actually one of the alumni from Move On Up projects, so thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm from Birmingham, an artist called Call Me Unique, the whole thing, I know is weird. So basically, I'm half reside in Birmingham, half in Budapest. Actually, my manager's from Hungary. And basically, I'm noticing that a lot of my opportunities are actually either in Hungary, Poland, or in parts in the UK. But the main thing is that most people that meet me will always have that question of why haven't you moved to London? And I guess especially with Sirius, they found me through contacts in Birmingham. So what my question is it still a benefit to be the big fish in the small pond, or is it a case of you have to move where the work is? Thank you.
We'll start with Andy on this.
Okay. I think for any for any UK musician, it's always London, isn't it? Really, but you can exist regionally, but I think it's hard. I think it's harder, and you're going to have to be prepared to come to London a lot. But I think the prejudice against regionalism has gone. Since I don't know, there've been various over since the Beatles and Liverpool. There've been kind of it's kind of be something it's part of your story. That you're from Birmingham. That's kind of it's part of you. That's part of your thing. But I think I think because of communication is, as we talked about before, it's so much easier now. It's so much easier to, people don't necessarily always know where you are because they're talking to you on social media. So yeah, stick to your Birmingham and Budapest. It's good combo. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have another question here. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm a student at the Academy of Contemporary Music. I'm a creative artist, singer-songwriter, but I'm also part of the student-led record label running out of Metropolis Studios called Metropolis Blue. It's public knowledge, but we haven't officially launched yet. My question is, in a day and age where everyone is so set on doing everything themselves, we're run by students for students, so we're specifically aimed towards the students in ACM. How can we make ourselves look attractive to a demographic that are very much focused on doing everything by themselves?
Very good question. I'm tempted to go to you first.
Well, you are doing it for yourself and by yourself. I guess it's who are you trying to reach outside of your school? What's your next step? Anybody, everybody. I think, I'm assuming, have you set yourselves up like a label?
Yeah, we operate out of Metropolis Studios, so we have regular meetings. We are going through artists to pick from the student roster at the moment. But what we're having issue with is when we're approaching the artists and we say what we're offering and what we want to do with them, they say, oh, actually, no, I'd just rather do it by myself.
Well, I think the idea of the collective, because I have been thinking about that as well, it's so important. Every band I went to see or, discovered for the first time when I was 18, 19 was because I liked X that was already in the collective. And I think that, if you're talking about bringing on artists, also, once you've had a couple of successes and they see what you do, and that it's really difficult to do it on your own. I mean, I know people have different opinions on labels, but they do know stuff, and they do have resources and things like that. And so if you guys can become that expert, so you have both the agency, and I've done it myself, but it is you guys, and really kind of present yourself as a collective, there becomes a real benefit. And there will just be people who are waiting and want to wait and see and make sure that there is something that's meaningful to them before they sign on. Yeah.
Okay, cool, that's fine.
I think that hand went up first, in the middle. We'd bring a microphone to the front. We've probably only got time for 2 more questions, actually, so one here and one at the front. Ish. There.
Oh, it's on. Yeah, hi, I'm Francesca. It's a very specific question to Andy. Yes, don't do that face. Last year, I was just going to America on holiday, but I'd been to Sudan with the British Council. So I was affected by the travel ban, and they banned me from the country. So I just wanted to alert everybody that if you've been to any of the countries on the travel ban, you can't get an ESTA, which a lot of people didn't know, even if you're a British citizen. So then I didn't know. Then I was going to do a course in New York, and I couldn't go. So I got a B2 visa, which not many people know about, and I just wondered if you could talk a bit about that, because I've looked online what a B2 visa is, and there's hardly any information, but it says it's for business and travel. And I think it means you can't earn money, so it's not a work visa, but you can go to like conferences and do business meetings, but it's really blurry, and I wondered if it was something other artists might be interested in looking into as well, because it's quite easy to get, you do have to pay, but
Could I ask Andy to answer this very quickly, because we've only got 2 minutes left.
Okay, I'll try and be brief. A B1, B2 is a business and tourism visa. It's what you need to enter the US if you can't, either if you're from a country that doesn't do ESTAs, or you can't have an ESTA because for some reason you've got criminal, or you've been to one of those countries on the list. It's pretty easy to do. You have to make an appointment at the embassy to do it, and you have to show a good reason to go to the US and strong ties to your home country that you're going to come back. You're not allowed to work on it. You're not allowed. That means not just earn money. If you're a musician and you go and play music on it, you're not supposed to. That's your work activity. You can go and do very specific showcases, possibly, but that's a slightly grey area. It takes about 3 days for the process to come through after you've had your embassy interview. If you would like any more, anyone's got any specific questions on it, would like any more information, I'm around in the coffee break. Come and have a chat about it.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Did we have one more question? Yes, final question, and 1 minute, please. Microphone, please. While we're getting the microphone to you, can I ask each of our 4 panel members to give me one phrase or one sentence that will help you to guarantee longevity for your musical professional life? What would your advice be, David?
Honesty.
Authenticity.
Flexibility. Being open to opportunities.
Produce really good stuff.
Well, you couldn't get better than that. We could have scripted that, but we didn't. I mean, what superb principles there. Final question, please.
Actually, about producing really good stuff. My name is Becky, and I'm a recording artist and audio engineer. I just completed my first debut album, and I just had a quick question regarding how to, let's say, perform the album more as a gig rather than, outside the open mic contests of pubs and stuff, how to push it forward. Because I'm from Italy, and I just don't know how to move regarding gigs in certain cities. You mentioned a central group that does that kind of thing, but
can I suggest that you, if I may on your behalf, that you pick this up with Andy and with David over coffee, which is 20 seconds away now. So that's why I'm so clear. I've got a flashing like that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good. And
okay.
Yeah, then I would outsource my question for her, but I guess I'll do the same.
Would you mind doing it over coffee? I do want to thank the panel. I think you'll agree that they're top of the game specialists, and we're enormously grateful to all 4 of you for giving up your time, not just to be here, but also to linger during the coffee break, which ends, it starts now. Coffee's behind you, I think, in the foyer. It starts again at 12 with a performance, then at 12:10 with the next session about how you make this career of yours happen. Thank you all very much for your attention and questions. Thank you very much.